Okay, thanks everybody for joining us on stage. So in the morning we introduced the project. Half an hour ago we had an open podium discussion, and now, as Vanessa correctly said, it is also the part of the participants to talk about their experiences on the PATH program. So to my left is Agata Biała, who is an MA student enrolled in the Jewish Studies Department at Jagiellonian University in Krakow. Next to her, Matylda Sobczak, who holds a BA in American Studies and is currently full-time working with a mysterious job she doesn't want to disclose. On the left to Matylda is Benedikt Gaisberger, one of the volunteers. Oh, sorry. So Agata and Matylda participated in the PATH project as part of AJCF. Benedikt and Joel are part of Austrian service abroad. Benedikt did his Holocaust Memorial Service in Latvia, in Riga, and is currently enrolled in the University of Business and Economy in Vienna. And Joel Kocher did his memorial service in the Jewish Museum of Sao Paulo in Brazil, and is currently employed in the mechatronic business. So thank you for the four of you for joining us today. To start with a very general question. So Austrian Service Abroad and AJCF, their methods of enrolling students for the PATH project are a bit different. So I would like to ask Agata and Matylda first. So when you saw, how were you interested in joining the PATH project? What got you into joining? How did you get the information, and what was the reason why you decided to join this project in the first place? Yes?
So I would like to start with that sentence that this project was very important to me, exactly to me, because I ended up with completely different place than where I started. And I just had always been interested in history, and the Jewish history was had felt like inaccessible for me somehow, because it's like I just heard from another interesting conversation yesterday that we have that great term describing very special situation with Jews, with history, with Jews history in Poland. It's like looking at reality through negative. So it's like I always have some informations about the Jews. In every book, Polish classical book, we have something about Jews, but actually it's like looking through the gaps. So it creates very specific kind of curiosity. So I wanted to apply it just because of that.
So you talked about you were familiar with some of Jewish history in Poland, but you realized there are a lot of gaps, and you saw participation in the PATH project as an opportunity to fill those gaps.
Yes,
okay.
Yes. And actually, it was just the beginning for me, because after this project, I just felt that I have to apply for Jewish studies. That's why in Department of History, that's why I'm currently a student. So,
which is a very big decision. So,
yes,
this is the future of the project, as we have seen. Okay, Matylda, what about you? What sparked your interest into joining this EU-funded program?
Okay, can everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. So I would agree with a lot of what Agata said, especially regarding the fact that Jewish history is always kind of present, especially in Polish schools. But regarding some of the things that especially Dr. Haska talked about during her presentation, you can kind of see that some of the narratives that are presented are not really in line with a lot of what the sort of new scholarship on the Holocaust tells us. But it wasn't really my main interest before I went to university. I studied American Studies in university, but during one summer, while I was already a college student, I ended up reading a book called Denying the Holocaust by Deborah Lipstadt, which is a great book. It's basically the first academic study of the topic of Holocaust denial that was ever conducted in the 90s. And that's how I became interested in not maybe specifically the topic of the Holocaust, although that's obviously related, but specifically the topic of Holocaust denial and how it affects society. So from there, I ended up sort of trying to engage with this topic by myself at first, or with friends, if that makes sense. So, for example, I conducted a social media campaign called History Interrupted with 3 volunteers from my university, essentially aimed at using social media to try to combat some sort of prominent negationist narratives that exist out there. I also started research for my senior thesis around this time, which was also focused on Holocaust denial in the US and Florida. And as all of that was happening, one of my friends, Julia, who studied Jewish studies at that point at my university, she sent me just basically like a flyer for PATH, because we actually didn't get any information about this for my major. Nobody really thought we would be interested. But since I could apply, I decided that this was probably the perfect opportunity to learn more about this topic that I was sort of starting to develop an interest in.
Oh, interesting. So you were interested in the topic already, but you discovered this basically by chance through your friend and colleague.
Exactly.
Okay. Did you read the book before the movie Denial came out?
Oh no, because I think the movie is from like 2013, I think. And I actually read the book in 2023, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah, this was about 3 years ago. Yeah, I was still a kid when the movie came out.
So yeah, this movie about the trial of Holocaust denialist David Irving. It's, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It is really, really one of the very big movies about this topic. Yeah, and obviously you can also read the book. Mm-hmm. Okay, Benedikt and Joel, you have started within this project in a little bit different way, because in our association we incorporated PATH as a part of the general preparation for our volunteers to do their Holocaust Memorial Service. So my question for the both of you would be, why did you start, or why did you want to do a Holocaust Memorial Service in the first place, especially since our association has, as Marina explained in the morning, also the option of doing social service or peace service. What made you interested in doing this?
So I think in Austria, I generally was really interested in history always, but in Austria it really depends on the teacher what you learn in history class. So for example, my teacher in high school didn't really focus on Holocaust or the Second World War in general. So I felt there was a big gap in my knowledge, and that's why I wanted to apply for it. And also the second really big reason was in my hometown, which is quite small in a rural area. I think 7-8 years ago, the home for the refugees was deliberately burnt down. And afterwards, in conversations, there was a lot of parallels drawn to sort of the Holocaust, sort of the uprising of Hitler. And it never really evolved to anything, but I sort of felt there is still something to learn here. And that's one of the main reasons why I chose to do, instead of military service, my memorial service or Holocaust service. So I think those are probably the main reasons.
Would you, just a follow-up question, would you consider this burning of a refugee home. Would you consider this an important event in your sort of politicization as a person?
Yes, of course. I mean, it was, I think, in 2016, so I was 11 or 12, so still quite young. But I was sort of just sitting on the table while it was being discussed, and it was like really big topics for an 11-year-old.
Yeah.
But it was sort of quite traumatic, I would say, because it was like literally like a kilometer away from my home. And it was really important for that. And it sort of then got involved and got more interested in this sort of time period. So it was a very sort of key moment for me, I would say.
Wow.
Even though I was 11 or 12 back then. So yeah.
Very impressive. Okay, Joel.
For me, it's the same with the teacher, but in a different way, because my teacher, she had a specific, or she has a heart for Israel and for this time period, so she focused a lot on Holocaust, on the Shoah, on the Second World War, and also the general history of Israel, so I had a lot of exposure there. And then I always wanted to do something meaningful with the service, so I don't consider going to the military as a quite useful option, so I always wanted to do something else. So I talked to her, or in a conversation it came up, and one of her teacher friends actually did the Gedenkdienst with us, and she went to Yad Vashem. So she told me about it, and then I talked to her, and that's how I got to the service. And during the time I discovered more the depth of Holocaust, and especially in Austria as well. So yeah.
Okay, so what is quite interesting is what I realized in the seminars, this distinction, not distinction, but the difference between Holocaust knowledge. Although in Austria there is a very strong curriculum, when I asked students during the seminars how many know about the Waldheim affair or something, maybe 50% of the hands go up. So although there is a very strong curriculum, the difference between how intensively history teachers choose to engage with this history seems to be still considerable. Okay, so you said you had a history teacher who was very much concerned with this history and who already taught you this. Okay, this brought you into the project. All doing Gedenkdienst. I'm sure our military our military commission has a different view on how important you see doing military service in Austria, but fortunately we still have the freedom to choose what we want to do. Okay, moving from the motivations. So maybe I can summarize again the activities you participated. We did short study trips to Vienna, to the Historical Museum in Linz, the Contemporary History Museum in Linz, and we went to Obersalzberg together. We were on the study trip to Poland together for an entire week. We did the seminar in Mauthausen. So I try to summarize all of our activities in the morning. So what would interest me very much for the beginning, so when you think back about those educational activities, are there one or two, it might be educational items, what are one or two things that you remember strongly about those activities? Who would like to start?
Okay, maybe I can start.
Okay.
So I would say that there were sort of two, for me, I would divide the activities that we did into sort of field activities, and this would mostly include trips to concentration and death camp memorials and museums like the museum in Linz, and discussions. And both of those are very impactful for me. I think the ones in terms of the sort of field activities that had the biggest impact on me, especially sort of emotionally, it was definitely our trips to Treblinka and to Mauthausen-Gusen. And this is, I think, pretty interesting because those two memorials are very different from each other. You saw pictures from both, I believe, at some point, but just to sort of recap, the picture from Treblinka is the one where it's mostly trees, so there are basically no structures of the actual camp left, mainly because it was almost exclusively an extermination site, unlike a lot of different places. So there's not much left there in terms of sort of physical evidence, whereas in Mauthausen, Gusen is a completely different story, but Mauthausen specifically, I'm not sure if all of it is original, but there are a lot of structures in place, and they are like brick, so they're pretty sturdy. So even though they were so different, Treblinka was more of an emotional experience because of the type of place that it was, because it was so heavily focused on just straight up extermination. And also because of the fact that we were exploring it, I think, basically individually. We had audio guides, and so we could sort of do it at our own pace. And then we also had the sort of prayer moment with Gaisberger, who was one of our participants. And then Mauthausen for me was impactful mostly because of the person that we were exploring it with, the tour guide, who was clearly very passionate, but not in like a sort of not in a disrespectful way. He was extremely respectful and very, very knowledgeable on what he was doing. And then, as far as the discussions that we talked about were concerned, I think all of them were extremely intellectually stimulating, and that's actually sort of the biggest impression that I had, especially at the beginning of the project, that I didn't expect to have so much sort of thrown at me and so much food for thought to sort of chew on later in the day. But this will probably come up later, so I don't want to get too deep into it. But one discussion that I remember very vividly was that we ended up having a very big talk one day at the end of the day about whether or not pacifism is a morally correct stance, or when it is or when it's not, basically the complexities of that question. So those are the types of things that we were talking about, and that was really what sort of made my synapses in my brain sort of fire up and made me think about different topics that I had never really thought about before, or I had never thought about their complexities before.
Mm-hmm. So maybe we can go back to the discussion of pacifism later. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, this is not postponing, but I believe this was a very big discussion at the time. I believe some of the other participants might also want to talk about this. Yeah? Okay, who wants to go next? Benedikt.
For me, probably the most impressive was the Poland Holocaust study trip. And there, the visit to Tikucin, I hope I pronounce it somewhat correctly, was very moving. For those who don't know, and my colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong, Tikucin is quite a small town in Poland, and before the Second World War, about 50% were Jewish, and they were shot by the Nazis in families together, and they were gathered in the main town square, and then had to walk to the forest and get shot there. And for me, it was the reason why it was so sort of memorable, because in that moment, we sort of went to the synagogue, we saw how the people lived, then afterwards we got ice cream, so we sort of got the feel for it, how life could be, and then we went by bus to the forest, and it was I think the same route that the victims took, and in that moment it felt very real, and it was just very overcome with emotion. And then at the mass graves, a colleague or a participant from Germany, she had actually written a poem about the kids who died there or in another mass grave, and that was very touching for me personally. So I still remember it very vividly, and it felt very, very real. And it's sort of, for me, Holocaust was always quite abstract. It was often just numbers, and in that moment I could almost feel like some sort of, I could relate to it. So that was very impressive and memorable.
Yeah, it made the Holocaust more tangible. Yeah. So for context, Tikucin is part of what is within historical research considered the Holocaust by bullets, which started with the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, I believe. When the National Socialists realized, Christopher Browning has written about this, that those exterminations by bullets led to the SS soldiers feeling extremely, having sort of all kinds of negative effects from it. Later in 1942, the idea of extermination through gas was born.
And this was just to say it was very important for me as preparation for Latvia as well, because in Latvia there it was only Holocaust by bullets mostly, and there were labor camps, but it was mostly Holocaust by bullets. So it sort of prepared me for that, and it was very important for me also later on to sort of have encountered those thoughts beforehand.
Mm-hmm. As a preparation for your
Yeah.
memorial service, okay. Well, I'm glad it worked out this this well in your case. Agata.
I just want to
Yes.
I just want to agree that visiting Treblinka and Tygocino was most moving and most important and crucial visits in our project. But I want to stress that visit in Krakow, because it was so inspiring that we can exchange our perspective, our Christian perspective, with Jewish, because we participated in prayers, and after that we had this great dinner together and in JCC.
Shabbat dinner, yeah.
Shabbat dinner, yeah. And that was amazing experience and very moving and very touching, because there was so open atmosphere, and I could feel it. I could feel this atmosphere in any person. So I remember it's the most touching thing.
Mm-hmm. So for you, the most important was actually the opportunity to
connect
interact with our international group and quite diverse group, and the intercultural aspect as well. Interesting. Okay, Joel, what about you?
For me, I didn't get the chance to visit or to go on a Poland study trip, so for me, what I heard, this would probably be the most impressive or memorable thing, but when we visited First Alpine, the museum there, probably because of my professional background as well, and this was...
They have 2 exhibitions, right? Maybe you have to explain that.
They have a few exhibitions too, and they started to revisit their past and what their role was in the Second World War with the forced laborers and with the weapons production and all this stuff. So
steel industry, yeah.
Yes, and so for me this was quite memorable to see that a big company and all those other aspects, not only the death camps, were part of the machinery and a part of the people that killed someone. So, and that also inspired me to go and look at the company where I worked at the time and looked what their role was and if I could find out what they did or if they were involved. And so yeah, that gave me the motivation and the inspiration to do that. So yeah.
Okay, so it sort of broadened your view on different aspects of this time. Okay, very interesting. We already talked about this aspect of youth exchange, and I would like to stay with this for a while. So obviously we talked about the activities, but we also talked about PATH. This is one of the main goals of PATH, to create this social space where young volunteers interested in the same topics can exchange their views with each other. So I would like to ask more about this. So what, except for the discussion about pacifism, you can come back to it if you want, yeah. But what are other aspects? What what were learnings not from our guides, not from the educators, but actually what are your learnings from your peers, and what were discussions between maybe members within the associations and also between the associations that you found really fruitful? Mm-hmm.
Two topics come up most often, and it was about definition of perpetrator, because we have obviously different background, historical, political backgrounds. So that was the most important topic, but also the role of violence in teaching about the Holocaust, because we have different ways how we should show the Holocaust, for example, in camps or in schools. When exactly, in what age we should start with education?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are different sort of pedagogical frameworks for different age groups. But I'd like to come back to what you said. The discussions about definitions of perpetrators. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? Can you give us an example?
For example, it's quite obvious. Some examples are quite obvious. The brightest, who was in concentration camps and who was Nazis, of course, soldiers. But we had some of very controversial situation. For example, who hide Jews and who collaborates with Germans. Situation with Jedwabne in Poland, but also in general in Austria. I heard many interesting statements about that we were the first victim, and that it still exists in some part of I don't know, in some conscious in mindset of older people, for example, that they don't want to create this this part of the identity of historical legacy, if he is alive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope that in Austria we have finally graduated from that myth, but I will not deny that there might be some elder people who still believe in it. Yeah. Okay, what about you, Matylda?
So I think I will just contrast what I sort of expected to what I ended up learning about specifically the Austrian perspective as I was in the program. So generally speaking, I try not to come in with any strong expectations into basically anything, and this was no exception. I didn't really want to create a bias for myself, but sort of subconsciously I assumed, and this was the type of thing where I just sort of thought this and I didn't really challenge it. I assumed that the perspective of Austrians and also the sort of issues that exist when it comes to Holocaust memory in Austria would be extremely similar, if not identical, to what they are in Germany. And this is just because I didn't know anything about this, and in my head, the idea was that these are both basically perpetrator nations for the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I didn't really think about the complexities that might be there. And during the program, I was able to learn about the fact that it is actually, the context is actually extremely different between these two countries, and that this shows up in a number of ways. One of those was that we talked about something called the Opferthese, which is a very sort of outdated topic. So not really something that is, I hope at least, raised anymore, but something that definitely was a part of sort of Austria coming to terms with its role in the Holocaust, historically speaking. And also how the political context in Austria immediately following the war affected how both the Holocaust was talked about, but also in how the physical remnants and the physical evidence of it was treated and what happened to it. So the example that comes to mind is what happened to the Gusen concentration camp. It was related to Mauthausen, and essentially what happened is that most of it was destroyed. in the immediate aftermath of World War II, and sort of a residential area was built there. And there's still people living in that area. So this is something that I had never really encountered before in Poland, even though I later realized that this does actually happen, and that I even know people who live in towns where this is something that's maybe not common, but that exists. But it was sort of the context of Austria becoming unified very quickly after World War II that also sort of affected these things. So basically, before coming into the program, I just didn't really realize how many differences there would be between the German perspective and the Austrian perspective. So that was very sort of fruitful for me, because obviously both of those perspectives are extremely different to the Polish perspective, not just because obviously Poland had a different role in the situation, but also because of the controversies that still exist and the difficulties that still exist in all of those countries in commemorating the Holocaust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it took Austria until 1991 until they officially acknowledged their guilt, and this is probably also one of the reasons why these former concentration camp areas, because the history was not acknowledged, they were then used for residential purposes, and now you have the Gusen Memorial right between the two blocks of residential buildings. Yeah?
Although, if I may just say something, this is also, as I said, this is also the case in Poland.
Yes.
So the example that comes to my mind, because it's very close to me, my boyfriend was born in Stutowo, which is where the concentration camp Stutthof was. And there was, of course, a huge villa for the camp commandant. And the actual camp, most of it is intact. Well, most of it is not intact, but most of the area of it is part of a memorial. But actually, the villa for the commandant, or the former villa for the commandant, is not. And like a pretty sort of wealthy family lives there now. And to my understanding, this is basically the result of a lot of these buildings being basically left up for grabs after World War II immediately, and there being a lot of chaos regarding who owned this property, especially with sort of the new communist government moving in, and there being a lot of confusion just about who owns what. So there's kind of a different situation where this is basically the result of like chaos, and now nobody really knows like what to do with this.
So I asked about youth exchange, and started talking about the historical perspectives. Okay, but would you say did the youth exchange actually amplify your understanding of this difference between Austrian and German narratives, at least until 1991, or was this part of the educational program?
Oh yeah, well, sorry, maybe I didn't make myself clear. A lot of what I
just to clarify.
Yeah.
I learned from the Austrians that they don't think they're perfect.
No. That's not what I meant. I think
yes.
I was more so talking about being able to talk to people from different sort of geographical area, and them telling me sort of what the issues that they see in both in historical perspective and sort of how they affect the contemporary situation and how they are. So it was in large part sort of part of the youth exchange, mainly because you can't really get this kind of perspective on these things by just reading a book, and especially on how sort of these past issues still affect the present. So a lot of the time I was able to sort of ask people about whether or not they saw remnants of this type of thinking in their everyday lives, and how, and sort of what, or how they would improve education on the Holocaust in Austria with that context in mind. So yeah, the historical context we learned through, for example, the lectures, but then there was also opportunities to sort of discuss that would really put into perspective in a way that, again, like reading a book or an article would not.
Okay, very much so. Joel, what are your thoughts? Your learnings from the youth exchange?
For me, I think it made me realize the complexity and the depth of the different backgrounds from the people that came there and talked about the same topic. And I remember the discussion we had about with the violet, was it the violet lila Winkel? Yeah, where it got quite heated and quite emotional, and I think that made me realize that it's not only about facts and about this happened or that happened, it's also about emotions and the personal connection, because there are people that have like had family that died there or had family that helped the Nazis, and so I think that made me realize, even in those discussions, that we have to be open and respectful and to the other people, and don't like try to force someone to accept or to to accept what I think is real or is right, because just that's what I feel. We have to take in account the emotions, the background, all the other things, what everyone individually is bringing with them. And we saw that in the heated discussions, but we also saw that in the evening when we had a few beers and talked about other stuff. So that's I think was the most memorable part of the exchange. Yeah.
Okay, so a lesson in tolerance I wrote down. Okay, we keep coming back to the same topic. Benedikt, what about you?
For me, how probably that even in Austria, like depending on the family or what is the family's history, is very different how you sort of get taught about the history. And during World War II, so a person from Carinthia has completely different way of talking about it, or in the family, or different family history. And especially with the Jewish participants, this is lived history, and they have like stories from their grandfathers, their great grandfathers or mothers. And for example, also I still remember when we were in Auschwitz, and there is this huge book, and there were some of them were searching for names, and the sort of then made it even more tangible, and we could talk to them, and we could exchange how it was in our families and theirs. So this was probably the thing that I most learned from the youth exchange.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the interaction with our Jewish participants. Okay, so another question that would be, we partly talked about it already, the difference between sort of Polish, German, and Austrian perspectives in terms of historical perspectives, in terms of different national narratives. Does anybody want to add to this? Yeah?
Before the PATH project, or before Austrian Service Abroad, I hadn't really thought about that at all. I don't know why, but now it seems very obvious that people can have, depending on their education or from where they come from, have very different perspectives. And it was also, there were very important lessons for my service in Latvia, because in Latvia, Holocaust remembrance is completely different than in Austria, partly because of the Soviet occupation beforehand and afterwards, but also how they just talk about it, and not to sort of make snap judgments and sort of take a step back, so not to get personal with it, and sort of try to put yourself in their shoes and sort of relate to that. And there were lots of moments where I had during my service in Latvia where I sort of had to take a step back and not to get personal with it or anything like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So also a lesson in tolerance a little bit. Since you have talking about your memorial service, I'd like to extend the question to Joël. So you did a Holocaust memorial service in Brazil. What were the differences you have witnessed there?
Yeah, I think the biggest difference there is that the people don't really learn or know about it. Like, they learn the basic that it happened, but since it's so far away and they didn't really take that much part in it, they don't have a personal connection like we have. Like, it didn't happen there. The only thing that they kind of get a connection with is the people that came afterwards, or even the Germans that came to the south of Brazil. So it's probably more a connection there with the Germans than the Jews. So that was kind of interesting to see, like, that they have so many Germans there, and they have a whole different direction to go to the Second World War and all this stuff. So yeah, and also in our museum didn't have the main focus of the Holocaust. So it was quite different, because they mostly their focus is on the Brazilian Jewish community, and not they don't want to be a Holocaust museum, they want to be a Jewish museum because that's what is the biggest part in their country. So
to serve as a community center. So
yes, and because they don't really have that much connection to the Holocaust like directly, so they more have an indirect connection to it. So they have they have an exhibition about it, and they teach the people because they know it's important. Yeah. But they also say it's not the only thing that's important about Jewish culture. There are so many more things, so that's what they want to like show the people and focus on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so less sort of victim centrism as in the European context, more community focused. I'd like to extend a question to Agata and Matylda. So you have talked about how this exchange and also how the educational activities enrich the understanding of other countries, sort of the Austrian perspective, maybe the German perspective. But I would be curious, since especially the study trip through Poland is an extremely, it's a very intensive week with a lot of different stations. So I would be curious if this has also somehow enriched or extended your understanding of the Polish discussion about the Holocaust.
The biggest thing that the Poland study trip did for me was definitely that we learned a lot about Jewish life in Poland before the Holocaust, which I didn't really know that much about because I wasn't really studying anything related to Jewish studies or really anything related to Poland at all. And of course I knew that Poland used to have a very large Jewish population before World War II. But I didn't really know much of the specifics of this. So we went to Warsaw, Łódź, and Krakow, and these were three cities that had significant Jewish populations. So, for example, the types of things that I didn't know were things like the specifics of these communities, how they formed, their sort of demographic makeup within them. Where they specifically lived in these cities. And because I live in Krakow, I've never lived in Łódź or in Warsaw, so it's not really, so for those cities, it wasn't really so close to me that it would be like a daily occurrence that I would be walking through these places. But I had been to those places before, but I had no idea that different areas of the city used to be like a Jewish quarter. In the case of Krakow, we do have a Jewish quarter, but unlike many cities in Europe, the Jewish quarter didn't become the ghetto. The ghetto actually became a different part of the city entirely. Mm-hmm. And I go to that part of the city quite a lot. And now, after this trip, I'm able to sort of appreciate that more, and I'm able to see the remnants of it. There's a small part of the ghetto wall that is still there. It's not like a big memorial or anything like that. It's just there, and there's like a little plaque, and that's basically it. So most people don't even know about it. But I would have probably never known about this, even though I go there all the time. So it's really things like that. It's the vibrancy of the Jewish community in Poland before World War II, and how much kind of I think we lost as a country by losing this part of the local culture there, but also the specifics of, unfortunately, how these communities were exterminated. Because in a lot of cases, these things went differently. There were slightly different mechanisms. There were different modes of resistance within these communities. So I don't really remember learning about the specifics of any of that in Poland, and especially since the city that I went to school in didn't really have a huge Jewish population. So that was definitely quite enlightening for me. And I also think from sort of the other side, as kind of a contrast to what is common in Poland, I think a lot of the sort of historical perspectives that I heard in general on the trip, not just from people from other countries, were more intersectional than what I was used to before that. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is considering, for example, the impact of just of different variables on the experiences of various people, considering sort of different victim groups also, besides just Jewish people. Of course, they were the main victim group, but there are also, we also had some discussions about, for example, the Roma and Sinti, right, that I also didn't have a lot of knowledge on. So, yeah, basically those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. So I wrote down awareness building sort of experience for you, yeah? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Agata, yes.
I would like to add that even I've been several times in Auschwitz, it was completely different experience to be, for example, Treblinka or another concentration camps. And I've never been in Łódź or in Tykocin or many synagogues. I visited synagogue first time during this project, so it was amazing impact on me. And we don't have a lot of information about Jews and culture in schools, so that was amazing that I could learn about it. And I think that I started to think about local history more because of that, because of Jewish participants. For example, this speech of Gabriel in Tykocin was very inspiring. The prayer, yeah. And in synagogue, how he translates the Hebrew letters and Yiddish letters. And after that, I was with him. I took part with him in a small trip in Polish shtetl. So it was an amazing experience to see how someone from another country back to some village where his family have lived for generation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so sort of adding to the local aspect of it, and also awareness building, being just aware of this Jewish culture, which then largely was perished. Yes. I would like to extend a question to our two volunteers, former volunteers over there. So let's stick to the topic that Matylda just brought up, this idea of awareness building. So obviously in Austria, this idea of Holocaust commemoration is very much combined with the idea to take up responsibility for the past in order to not let it reoccur. So I would be very interested in how all these different educational activities, but especially, and you can realize the educational activities on site had a much more lasting impact. I would be interested in how these activities influenced, changed, or maybe strengthened this idea of taking up responsibility for you. Or if it didn't happen, that's also okay.
I think I just got more confident in talking about it, and I think this is really important if you want to learn about other sort of parts of the Holocaust or Second World War, and especially when I gave guided tours in the museum that I worked. Of course, being confident is one of the most important things, and sort of being aware of your own nationality and of your own national identity. So if you get questions, you can sort of draw comparisons, you can sort of get them involved. So this probably, and also in terms of our Austrian identity on Holocaust, it sort of also learned me or got me closer to sort of the generation of my parents. Because not close, I wouldn't say that, but when I told, for example, that I'm going to do Holocaust Remembrance Service, some people said, "Oh, why are you doing this? Oh, can't we just forget? Like, you're making us guilty again." And I never got that. I'm like, sort of like, why would you say that? This is completely why? And
is this from your family or from
no,
friends?
not from friends or family, but sort of like in the 60s, I would say. So, but then I sort of realized only later, because I went to school and it was a topic being dealt with in history classes, that it was a taboo topic. They weren't allowed to talk about it because living relatives were in the war and didn't want to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for example, the uncle of my father was in Stalingrad and never talked about it, and it was very traumatic. So, I understood more from where they come from and why they sometimes think like that. So, I became a little more tolerable to those views. I could say, not really, but I sort of like then tell them, "Wow, this is not okay actually to say," but I don't completely snap at them. So yeah.
Okay, interesting. So you, on the one side, you became aware of this generation gap, but by becoming aware of it, you could also sort of closen it a little bit. That's a really interesting self-discovery. Yeah.
It may be difficult to sort of frame and get into words, but it's very important because when they said those things, I was like, I went home, or I was like, sort of, this is, oh my God, what are they talking about? But it was important learning for me, personally.
Okay, thank you very much for being so open with us about this. Joel, what about you?
I think for me it's kind of the same, because I'm also from the countryside and from a small town, and like no one talks about it, and you don't really, you know about it, but you don't talk about it. That's how it is in our, like, in this generation as well. And so this project made me and my history teacher, we started to look into our town and to the history and what happened there. And we started a project for the Stolpersteine, because we found out that we had a few Jews living there, and also not only Jews, but disabled people as well, that were taken to concentration camps. And so we started this project, and I think this path and also the Austrian service, it made me realize and more sensible to those topics and to take action and start doing something on my own. So yeah.
Okay, so it really transformed into activity. Did you succeed to install the stone?
Yes, we did.
Oh, that's...
Yes.
Deserving of applause. So we have been discussing for about an hour. Is there something? Yes? So is there something you would like to add? Because otherwise I will open the floor for questions. Yes?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what I said about sort of intersectionality, and also because you mentioned that, like, oh, the in-person stuff was the most impactful. I think, this was a long time ago, so I hope I'm not making this up, but I think I remember that we had a webinar on women, right? Mm-hmm. So that was actually one of the...
Women resistance, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, on women's resistance and the sort of, in general, women's perspectives in the Holocaust, and that was also part of sort of the intersectionality that I was referring to, that we have women as just sort of a group that, you know, their experiences are going to be a little bit different, and we sort of acknowledge that. So that's just an example that I remembered, and also just to clarify, what I meant to say with sort of the Sinti and Roma was more so that we also talked talked a little bit about other victims of the general Nazi genocide project. So a small difference, but just to clarify sort of the terminology.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. Okay,
Great.
yes.
Excellent. Yeah, great to hear that so many further projects resulted from the project path. Yes, kudos to all of you. Let's open up the floor to some questions. I'm dying to ask my questions, but I guess we'll let you guys go first.
Thank you, Art, for
So we will.
Do you want to? Let's wait for the microphone so that everyone can hear you. Thanks very much.
And the audience online as well.
Thank you all for sharing your experiences. I would like to direct my question to Benedikt because I would like to ask you to share something more about your Latvian experience, especially about like the cultural memory there, because as you have mentioned, this was the place which was like occupied by Soviets, but also it was the place where the Latvians have their own SS division, and it was the place which was like fighting almost till the end of the war. So I'm sure that you have experienced a lot of tensions there, and I would like you to share something like how is the cultural memory there, how is the remembrance, and what are like, for example, historical monuments are there. Thank you.
So this is a very complex question, and generally the narratives there are very complex because after World War II they didn't really have Jewish Holocaust remembrance there. It was basically from the Soviets the mass murders of Soviets. Of Soviet workers, I think it was framed. So you have sort of different narratives sort of working against each other, and you get very sort of. I got some questions. For example, we had play for kids in our museum where the story of our museum was getting taught, and after the play, an 8-year-old came to my colleague and asked. My grandfather always says that the Nazis were the good ones. They helped us fight the Soviets. And then, as I said, you have to take a step back and sort of realize this is an 8-year-old talking. And then she just asked him, you have seen the play. Do you think the Nazis were the good ones? And he's like, no. But it sort of sheds a light on how difficult it is sometimes. And there are also a lot of memorials still being installed. For example, our museum was opened in 2013. A lot of other mass grave memorials were installed like in the late 2000s. So it's still a lot of work, I would say, for them. And also my coworkers always said that. They still have to sort of deal with their history and also with the very traumatic aftermath of the Second World War with the deportations to Siberia of Latvians. So you have sort of a lot of different narratives, a lot of different opinions, you have to be sort of, you have to know the facts and then go from there and sort of try to deal with the questions as good as possible.
One follow-up. Do you think the Latvian government is doing something regarding that currently? Especially given the current political tensions and relations to the Russia.
Yeah, and so the Latvian government, I don't know, good job. I don't want to comment on that, but generally it's very different. For example, in Austria. In Austria, sort of, if there is a Holocaust commemoration, a lot of politicians show up, and in Latvia, you are lucky if one shows up, basically. I had the feeling, for example, there was the commemoration of Rumbula, where 25,000 Latvian Jews got killed in 2 nights, and there was the commemoration there, and none of the politicians showed up that were invited. So it's sort of like, for me, that was a scandal, and I still think this is a scandal, because it wasn't Jews, it was Latvian Jews. And sort of I sometimes had the feeling, and my coworkers sort of also sometimes agreed with that they see Latvian history and they see Jewish history. For them, this isn't the same. It isn't sometimes not even connected. So it's not Latvians that were killed; it were Jewish people that were killed. And so they think, we don't have to show up. Or maybe I don't know what they thought actually, because I don't get it. But yeah. So the Latvian government is very sort of now with Russia. They have a lot to deal. But if they're doing stuff right, let's see. I don't know.
Okay. Thanks very much. Any other questions? Yeah?
Thank you very much for taking the time to come here and for sharing your experiences with us. I have a question for Benedikt and Joël. As we heard, there might be some unexpected things that can happen when you do a memorial service abroad. Do you have any specific piece of advice that you can share with us, future memorial servants abroad, that would have helped you if someone gave you that advice before you started your service? Thank you.
I love the question.
For me, I think what was most important is that you should always be respectful and to be sort of open-minded and not say like, I don't know, like, and don't force the narrative or try to argue with someone who is like, try to argue objectively if someone is emotionally. So if people come with their own history with the topic and then they ask you something and you go and tell them, oh, like this and this is how it is, like in the history wise, and then they get upset because you don't took the time to step back and like ask him why he is. So before answering certain questions, I think it's important to ask where the guys or the question is coming from and why, so that you try to avoid conflict or to avoid without mistakenly offending someone or mistakenly hurting the people there. And also what would have helped probably is the education on the current political topics, or like to give us a little bit of a direction or what we can say, because those are the things that people come and ask if they hear that you're from Europe, from Austria. They ask you all the political stuff, what's going on now, and what is your opinion on that. And for me, it was important to say, to like take a step back and don't try to tell them something I don't really know. So I always told them, I'm sorry, like I don't have enough information or have the educational background to give you a good answer. I can tell you what I think, but that's not what, there's no foundation for it. So, yeah.
Right.
For me, it's probably also just being open-minded and sort of get out of your comfort zone, to not stay at home, to try every sorts of different things with people that you don't know. So get out there, I guess, would be my advice. Yeah. And for like, it really depends on which sort of country or region you go to and sort of the culture there. If you, as Joel said, be respectful, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, and open-minded, I think, is a great one. That's the whole reason you're doing it, right? Yep. Excellent. Thanks for that question. Pardon me? I think the question was directed at the two, but would you like to say something?
Well, I was scared because we didn't do the volunteer before.
No. Okay. Oh, great. Thanks very much. All right. Do we have any other questions? Yes, the gentleman in the front.
So thank you very much for sharing your amazing experiences with us. And I suppose all of you have grown a lot as a person during your time at PATH. Could you maybe like describe the most important life lesson you've learned during your time at PATH, if there is one?
I think we'll let the ladies begin then again, right?
This is your chance now to inspire everybody in this room.
So that's a great question, first of all. And there are a lot of things that I could talk about, but I think the biggest thing that I'm going to say is it's just a specific way of thinking about history and learning to sort of learning just how many just how complex the topic of commemoration is, because I think for someone who is sort of from the outside looking in a way, or who maybe isn't like actively interested in this topic, a lot of the time, you know, you might see, for example, a monument being created to any really historical event, and you might not realize how likely it is that there were a bunch of controversies with how that was going to look like, who was going to be mentioned, who wasn't going to be mentioned, what the monument, if there's like an inscription, what it was going to say, like word by word, basically. People put a lot of stock into how history is talked about, and rightfully so, especially when it comes to events as horrific and as impactful on the world, and in this case on the Jewish community, as the Holocaust. But and yeah, that is a good thing. But that does also tend to lead to some conflict sometimes, and it's important to understand where that is coming from in order to be able to sort of navigate that and make sure that we can talk about the past in a way that is respectful and that is inclusive when it needs to be, and exclusive when it's time to commemorate like very specific things. And I think this is also a philosophy that I sort of carry with me. I still work on topics related to the Holocaust, but it is something that I also try to carry with me when I look at other contexts. Not in the exact same way, because you can't apply the exact same thing everywhere, especially since there's cultural differences between different regions. But there are a lot of different sort of controversial topics in history that still are commemorated, or maybe sometimes are not. And a lot of the time there is a lot of discussion happening behind those events, and it's good to just understand the way of thinking about history that goes into thinking about commemoration, of course, in a way that is responsible.
What about the rest of you? What was your...
I can say that I feel that I should be more aware of my environment, because we are talking about huge processes, but it was history before and after, and I wasn't aware of, for example, the history after. So it was just next to me, and it's worth to be aware about your local and history and your local place when you are living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Benedikt, go ahead.
I think it's mostly the things that I already mentioned, to sort of not to make snap judgments, or sort of get where people are coming from and what they maybe have experienced or family members have experienced. Mm-hmm. And also, I mean, it was 2 years ago or 3 years ago the path started?
2 years.
24, so
2
I mean,
years.
I was 18 back then, graduating high school. So I think in general you just grow a lot as a person in that time. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And for me, it's probably to accept the people and accept where they come from, even if it's not your point of view or what you think or experience, because you never know what the other person went through or experienced. So to don't judge the people or to offend or feel offended because of what people say, because you can't know the background of it, to just accept that. But you don't, we can know a lot of things, but we don't really can understand everything. So to accept it and to take a step back and look at it from a different perspective, I think.
Great, thanks very much. Any more questions before we end off? Great, then I get to ask mine. question to all of you. You don't all have to answer, but what would you tell a young person who's considering taking or undertaking PATH? And I'm going to have to limit you to 2 or 3 sentences. What would you say? Either to convince them to do it or not to do it, depending, of course, on your experience.
So if the question is between like remembrance service and military service in Austria?
If I came to you and I said, I'm considering doing remembrance service.
Do it.
Okay, I think that's been taken by someone else already.
No, but I know it's more work than military. You have to do preparations. You have to fill out a lot of forms because you're in Austria, and you have to sort of apply everywhere. I mean, it's a lot, and it seems a lot, and can be overwhelming, but it's very much worth it in the end.
Great, thanks, Benedikt. Anyone else?
I guess I would also say do it, comma. It's going to be very challenging, not all the time, but at times. But it's also extremely enriching, and it really feeds your mind. And as I already mentioned before, gives you so much to chew on later on and to think about, to reflect on.
Excellent, thanks, Matylda. Either of you? Got a... No? No? We don't have to, then we're done. Excellent. So thanks once again to our participants. Thanks for being with us here today, for your openness and for your courage. Your stories remind us that remembrance is not abstract, it lives in people. And in the final part of today's conference, we will be looking ahead to the future. But for now, we're going to press pause. It's time for a quick coffee break of half an hour, and we will get back here at 4:30.